It was a moment I never saw coming. My sister-in-law reached out to me with an unexpected invitation to join her bachelorette trip to the Greek islands. I should have been skeptical, but I didn't see it as just a random request. It felt like something bigger, like an attempt to rebuild something long broken. And then there was the twist. Right before our flight, she casually dropped the bombshell that I would need to pay for everyone's expenses. It felt like the past and present collided in an instant. Let me take you back. My relationship with her wasn't always like this. In fact, it was the complete opposite. You see, Steffi and I go way back. We were high school classmates, and to put it simply, she wasn't exactly the kindest person to me. As a teenager, I was the perfect target for her. I was the total nerd, awkward, skinny, and saddled with braces. I wasn't just a shy kid, I was the shy kid. Picture the girl in a high school movie, the one who only gets a makeover at the end, right after the glasses come off. Only, for me, it wasn't glasses, it was braces. And it took years before I could shake off that image. Thankfully, I look a lot different now. I've gained some weight, and I got rid of those braces before starting college. But back then, I was an easy target for ridicule. Things didn't really change for me until I met Andy. It was at a college party, my third year in. He was the DJ, 3 years older, a bit of a legend. Honestly, I don't even remember how much I drank, but I know that when the night ended, I was wasted. No one was going to take me home, but Andy, he was the one who stepped up. He offered me a ride home, even scribbled his phone number on the back of my hand. He told me I could call him. The next day, hungover and embarrassed, I called him anyway. And from that moment, we hit it off. We connected so easily, it was like we'd known each other forever. But there was a catch, his sister. I could tell Andy wasn't entirely comfortable talking about her. We'd made this instant connection, but as we started talking about our families, he casually mentioned her name, Steffi. The same name as the girl who had tormented me all throughout high school. At first, I laughed it off until he told me that it was probably her. His sister. The high school bully. The words hit like a ton of bricks. But I wasn't about to let that derail what felt like something real. So, I swallowed my discomfort, smiled, and assured him, it's fine, I'm not interested in being friends with her. I'm here for you. And he agreed. Fast forward a few months, and Andy and I decided to introduce each other to our families. I had no problem with mine, they welcomed him with open arms. But his family? Well, things weren't exactly smooth sailing. The first time I went to dinner at his house, my nerves were shot. I knew I'd have to face Steffi, and I dreaded it. But to my surprise, she wasn't a monster. She didn't shower me with kindness, but she was coldly civil. A far cry from the girl who had made my high school years miserable. And honestly, I preferred this version of her. I didn't need to make small talk or pretend everything was okay. We just ignored each other. And that suited me just fine. Since then, things had stayed that way. We coexisted, barely exchanging more than a few words. She never tried to be friends with me, and frankly, I didn't want that either. Andy understood, of course. He knew how badly she had treated me. And he respected that I couldn't just forgive someone who had never even apologized. He didn't have an issue with the distance between us, because he knew the truth. His sister hadn't changed, not in any meaningful way. But that didn't stop him from having a normal relationship with her. And I was fine with that. After all, it wasn't about me and her anymore, it was about Andy and me, and our lives together. So, when Steffi reached out a few weeks ago, asking me to join her bachelorette trip, I didn't know what to think. At first, I was suspicious. What did she want? Was this some kind of trap? But Andy, of all people, encouraged me to go. Give it a chance, he said. So, I did. We had lunch together, just the two of us, and there she was, Steffi, the girl who had made my high school life hell, sitting across from me, acting, well, nice. She wasn't the same person I had known back then. In fact, she seemed almost genuine. And then she did something I never thought I'd see. She apologized. For everything. She admitted to being a brat, to being cruel, and to realizing her mistakes way too late. And then she went on to explain why she hadn't confronted me about it sooner. She'd felt awkward, unsure how to face me after everything. I sat there, stunned, not sure what to say. And as if on cue, a tear or two slipped from her eyes. It was almost too much to process. But, like the emotional fool I am, I believed every word. She looked so sincere that I couldn't help but soften. "I forgive you," I told her, more out of instinct than anything. After all, we were adults now, and it felt like time to put the past behind us. The whole lunch was a strange, surreal experience, but I walked away with a sense of resolution I hadn't expected. We had a couple of drinks together, and as we wrapped up, it felt like we were leaving the tension behind. She seemed happy about it, and we ended lunch on a decent note. Then, out of nowhere, she invited me to join her and her friends on their bachelorette trip to the islands. She said she wanted to make up for lost time and really show me that she considered me a friend. At first, I was hesitant. Who wouldn't be? But the more she insisted, the more I began to think it might be a good opportunity. Maybe it would help ease the tension between us, and honestly, I was getting tired of the awkwardness whenever we shared a room. After much back and forth in my mind, I agreed. It seemed like a fresh start, a chance to put the past behind us. What better way to do that than a trip to let loose and just have fun? That was a couple of weeks ago. Since then, we'd kept in touch. She was getting married next month, and we were supposed to head out at the start of this week. But that didn't happen, thanks to a stunt she tried to pull at the airport. I don't think she saw it coming, but she made a huge miscalculation. She thought she could trap me into paying for the entire trip by throwing this bombshell on me right at the airport. Her plan was to spring it on me so last minute that I wouldn't have any choice but to foot the bill. But little did she know, I wasn't about to fall for that. I had no issues walking away, no hesitation. Unlike her, I didn't care what her friends thought of me. I didn't care about what she thought either. To be honest, I was already so fed up with everything that I didn't even flinch. We arrived at the airport an hour before our flight, and while we were all chatting casually, Steffi pulled me aside. She said she wanted to grab coffee, and of course, I went with her. At the counter, she casually dropped the bombshell. She told me, almost offhandedly, that I should make sure my cards worked internationally, because otherwise, I'd be in a world of trouble when it came to paying for things. I told her I'd be carrying cash for souvenirs and little trinkets, thinking she was talking about small purchases. But no! She meant the bigger stuff, the hotel rooms, the meals, and even the flight tickets. Suddenly, I was expected to reimburse her for all of that. This was news to me. We hadn't discussed anything about how we were paying for the trip, and now, half an hour before our flight was supposed to take off, she was telling me I was footing the bill for everything? I asked her straight out, "Are you serious? Are you expecting me to pay for all of this?" She responded, without hesitation, that not only was I expected to pay for myself, but for everyone else too, the whole group. The friends. All of them. She even went as far as to say she picked this expensive destination because she knew I could afford it, and she assumed I'd sponsor the entire thing. I remember her exact words, and the tone, like it was an obvious given. As if we'd discussed it 100 times before, when in reality, this was the first time I was hearing about it. My mind was reeling. "Are you serious?" I repeated, stunned. But she didn't back down. She said that if I refused, she'd think of me as a miser. I was the one with the biggest paycheck she knew, and she couldn't see any reason why I wouldn't pay for the whole trip. In that moment, I felt a rush of clarity. First off, she was wrong. We hadn't discussed this. There had been no agreement. And just because I earned more than some of her other friends didn't mean I was going to start shelling out for their vacation. I couldn't fathom her logic. Sure, I made good money, I'm a VP at a firm, but that wasn't an invitation for anyone to assume that I'd throw cash around without hesitation. This wasn't about her friends. It wasn't even about the trip. It was about respect. And the fact that she had never asked me if I would be willing to cover any of it was the ultimate slap in the face. I stood there, listening to her, until I just couldn't anymore. I turned and walked back to where the group was sitting, grabbed my things, and just left. I wasn't about to make a scene, but I wasn't about to be part of this ridiculousness either. Steffi chased after me, her coffee in hand, and her friends tried to stop me, asking what was wrong. I didn't owe them an explanation, so I just walked right out. I found the first cab I could, got in, and left fast. Once I was safely in the cab, I blocked Steffi. I didn't want to deal with her anymore. Then, I called Andy. I felt bad for him. He had been so excited that his sister and I were finally starting to get along. I thought this trip would help mend things between us. But now? It felt like we'd been living in a fantasy. When I told him what happened, he was more stunned than I was. He couldn't believe it. He was beyond upset. He said it was unacceptable and that he would call their parents right away. I think he was even more disappointed than I was because, honestly, I had already suspected Steffi's true colors. But Andy? I could tell he was genuinely hurt by his sister's behavior. By the time I got home, Andy had already spoken to his parents. He didn't need to tell me everything, but I could feel the tension in the air. The storm had only begun to brew. The tension was rising as the words spilled out, words that hit harder than any punch could. She stormed into the house, furious, and aimed all her anger at me. The accusations came fast and heavy, each one cutting deeper than the last. Apparently, I was the reason her whole life was falling apart. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She blamed me for the fallout from the Bachelorette trip fiasco, the canceled wedding, and even the possible end of her engagement. It was as though I was the villain in a story I never even knew I was a part of. She claimed that because I refused to pay up, she had to cancel everything, her trip with her girlfriends, her dream wedding, and she even suggested that her fiancé would leave her because of me. The absurdity of it all was overwhelming. None of it made any sense. The trip, the one she so desperately wanted me to fund, wasn't my responsibility. Not once did she even ask if I was comfortable with covering the costs. In fact, there was no conversation about it at all. So why, then, did she think it was my fault? But the wedding, her wedding, it stung. I didn't want it to come to this, and yes, I felt a pang of sadness knowing she had worked so hard for it. But that wasn't my doing. Still, I couldn't help but feel conflicted. Did I handle it the right way? Did I overreact by venting to my husband? But when it came down to it, this was all on her. She was spreading lies, manipulating the narrative, and painting me as the villain in a tale I had no part in. And then came the endless posts, the sad, cryptic quotes on social media, dripping with victimhood. It was obvious. She was twisting the truth, trying to elicit sympathy and make me feel guilty. Even though I blocked her everywhere, I couldn't escape the constant barrage of pity parties she threw for herself online. The more I saw her posts, the less remorse I felt. She was playing a game, and she was losing. Her lies weren't working. The people around her saw through the facade. Relatives reached out to me, wanting to hear my side, and I made sure they got the truth. Her lies were unraveling, and her credibility was slipping. Then came the call. Andy, my husband, wanted to step in, confront her, and put an end to the madness. But I stopped him. There was no need. Her attempts to smear us were backfiring. She was digging her own grave. We didn't need to fight fire with fire. Let her continue, let her make a fool of herself. People could see who she really was. Weeks passed, and the storm didn't seem to quiet. She had lost everything. Her wedding, her fiancé, her self-respect. Now, she was living with her parents, the same ones who had refused to fund her wedding in the first place. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had railed against them, declared that she didn't need their help, that she had it all figured out. But here she was, swallowed by her failures, forced to crawl back to the one place she claimed she didn't need. My in-laws, kind-hearted as they were, took her in. But even that couldn't stop her. She couldn't keep her bitterness in check, even when she was living under their roof. She kept stirring the pot, whispering venomous lies in front of her parents, thinking they'd take her side. But they didn't. My in-laws had enough of her antics. They told her straight, either apologize and change, or she was out. The tension between them was palpable. They were done tolerating her childish behavior. But instead of taking responsibility, she just dug in deeper, throwing one last tantrum. She began messaging Andy, trying to guilt him into believing that I had ruined her life. She blamed me for everything, from her failed wedding to the loss of her fiancé. She painted me as the villain, the one who had destroyed her happiness. But none of it was my fault. I wasn't the one who lied, manipulated, or caused the mess. But she refused to see that. She just kept pushing, trying to drag us down with her. Enough was enough. The messages grew worse, more personal, more cruel. She crossed the line. I couldn't sit back anymore. We went to her parents' house to confront her. We had already spoken to them, so they knew why we were there. No questions asked, no sugarcoating it. She was sitting there, looking surprised to see us. The audacity! She actually questioned why we were there as if she was the only one who could visit her parents. But it wasn't about her. It was about putting an end to the lies, to the constant attacks. I was done being the scapegoat. I told her, point blank, to shut up. No more talking behind my back. No more lies. I was done letting her slander me. If she didn't stop, I'd make sure my side of the story got out. And trust me, it wouldn't be pretty. The response? A tantrum, accusations of blackmail, and her packing her things, storming out within an hour. She knew she wasn't welcome anymore. I'm sure she'll be back soon. She has nowhere else to go. But for now, she's out. She'll be back with her tail between her legs, begging for a place to stay. But we're done. Finally. And I'm better for it. We're better for it. As I stand here now, I can't help but think this was the only way. Enough is enough. She's gone, and we're free.